So this is the second part of the lecture on climate change. I'm going to adjust the projector here real quick here. And so in this particular lecture, I'm going to go over an alternative view on climate change. I'm sure everybody's heard about climate change. It's a hot topic. No pun on the word there. But certainly there's a lot of misinformation out there, as I've talked about in the first lecture. And I certainly have watched that recently with a news organization, KTLA Channel 5. They have really slammed the President of the United States when he talked about the wildfires in the western United States being attributed to poor management. And that is true to a very large extent. Unfortunately, this is a news outlet that has an extreme hatred and bias against the president, and they have allowed that to corrupt their basic integrity and their ability to disseminate information, which is what news is supposed to do. It's supposed to simply report the facts. And once we know the facts, then we can move forward and go with some resolutions. Unfortunately, we're never going to get to that point. And the reason we're not getting to that point is because of inaccurate reporting by malicious, biased news organizations such as KTLA Channel 5. So today I'm going to introduce anthropogenic climate change. That's a different hypothesis than what you will have heard on any news or media outlet whatsoever. This was actually proposed when I was a grad student. I actually read a book in 2004 called Plows, Plagues, and Petroleum by R.F. Redmond. And in Redmond's hypothesis, he attributes anthropogenic human climate change to changes in land use patterns, agriculture. And so he has some very key points. This goes back to your childhood, the tortoise and the hare. So everybody knows the famous race between the tortoise and the rabbit. And eventually the tortoise won, even though the rabbit should have won. And so this biased reporting is something that is keeping good workable hypotheses and good science from being the mainstream. So in Redmond's book, he breaks it down into the tortoise and the hare. These are two very important parts, and I want you to know these for the quiz. So according to Redmond, human climate change started between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, and it started because we went from nomads, from hunters and gatherers basically, to sedentary people. We actually settled in one place. And upon doing that, we domesticated both plants and animals. And it's at that point when we start global deforestation. So in China, thousands and thousands of acres of rainforest were removed. They deforested parts of China starting 8,000 years ago in order to accommodate the cultivation of rice. Now rice grows in a water-rich environment, and when rice grows, it emits methane gas, which is one of the greenhouse gases we discussed in the first lecture. This clear-cutting of the rainforest then spreads throughout Asia, eventually into Europe, and then into the Americas. Also, Mesopotamia is another very important place. So Mesopotamia, which is today Iraq and Iran. So if you read the Bible, it talks about the Promised Land, Iraq and Iran, which is today that region. Back in biblical times, it was known as Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. It was a lush land, a lush valley, full of fields and trees. Humans basically have transformed that region into a desert. And so we have basically created a virtual desert, a real desert, simply because we removed trees, we overgrazed, we introduced non-indigenous species, and this basically resulted in a destruction of the ecological region of Mesopotamia, transforming it into a desert. We're doing this today throughout the world. There are regions where we are engaging in agricultural patterns that are in marginal areas that we should not even consider doing agriculture, areas where agriculture is not sustainable, and as a result we are creating deserts. And when you create a desert, you do two things. You decrease the atmospheric concentrations of moisture, which makes it drier, And drier conditions usually result in warmer conditions. So there's your global warming right there. Land use changes. We are changing the makeup of the land. And currently, with mechanization and the industrial processes going on throughout the world, we are doing this at a very alarming rate. We're cutting down the trees, we're cutting down the forests, and if you want to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, plant trees. Stop chopping them down. And the sad thing about this deforestation, it's occurring today on land that's controlled by governments. Our own government's doing it, right here in the United States. We can stop anthropogenic climate change by stopping deforestation. It's that simple. But really it's not that simple because it's complex, because governments are involved in it, and when the governments are involved in it, the scientists are pushed to a side, and the politicians get to take over, and this is when things fall apart. So Revans Hypothesis had two parts. The Tortoise, he said that climate change started 12,000, 8,000 years ago. We went from nomads, we started forming townships, villages, eventually towns. We engaged in intensive agriculture. We domesticated both plants and animals. The Anasazi Indians did this very well. They did an extremely good job of taking two different species of corn and splicing them together. And what they obtained out of that was a species of corn that was more drought resistant, would mature quicker, and yield higher qualities. Today we do it through DNA. We actually changed the genetic makeup of wheat, of corn. So the products that we eat today are basically GMOs. They're genetically modified organisms, which are not good for us. So agriculture then spreads, agricultural revolution, and because of that, methane and carbon dioxide depart from the norm. This is way, way, way before there's an industrial revolution. This is prior to the human use of fossil fuels like coal and oil. So carbon dioxide and methane depart from the norm about 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. And this is being attributed to intensive agriculture, which spreads. So that's basically is the tortoise. And on the graph here, this is slow, steady state climate change. The hare comes and starts about 200 years ago with industrialization. So the hare, now we have global deforestation, and it is literally global. And the machinery that we have today can just strip out thousands of hectares or acres in a relatively short period of time. Fossil fuel use and changes to landscapes. So we have changed the entire landscape of our planet. Look at the Midwest. These used to be grasslands. We basically have taken those grasslands and we ripped out the grass, the native grass species, and we planted corn. That is a very dark soil. And that dark soil is now exposed. All throughout the spring, fall and winter, that dark soil now attracts more incoming solar radiation. So it in itself has created a huge vast area of a thermal blanket. That basically means that we're taking shortwave radiation from the earth, we're allowing it to hit this dark soil, that then converts that shortwave radiation into longwave radiation, which attempts to exit the earth. So we've created more long-wave radiation, and because of the additional greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we now retain more heat, more of that long-wave radiation. So humans are changing climate today due to a multiple reasons. So it's not a simple process of just like, let's eliminate CO2, let's put taxes on fossil fuels and anything that's carbon-based. That's the political answer, because the politicians are out for one thing and one thing only. They're out for your money in the form of taxes. Don't trust the politicians. Don't trust the people who wear the suits. They are the evil ones. So let's look at this hypothesis of, so basically Redmond says that humans have disrupted the carbon cycle. Land use changes through clear-cutting the rainforest starts in Mesopotamia and China. So Mesopotamia was the promised land, today is a desert. We converted it into a desert through deforestation, through diversion of the rivers, through the introduction of non-native species. Spread of agriculture then goes into Europe, Asia, South and Central America. And today, the central United States, the once grasslands are now lands that consist of dark soils that are well exposed And those dark soils are basically attracting the sun's long-wave radiation. So it's these changes throughout the world is what's driving anthropogenic climate change. So deforestation and land use changes, I mean, it starts 12,000 to 8,000 years ago. And so we have about 10,000 years ago, humans became more sedentary. We stayed in one place. And this all is brought about due to natural climate change. So remember, 12,000 years ago is when global warming, if you want to call it, started. The ice masses started to retreat. So climate started warming 12,000 years ago, really before humans were a dominant species on Earth. Does that mean it's all natural? I would say no. I would say that we are definitely speeding the process up. We are attributing to climate change through deforestation, through land use changes, and a lot of other factors. So his hypothesis basically says that we have disrupted the carbon cycle. So today we are spending millions of your tax dollars, and when you get jobs out there in the real world, you're going to pay taxes, and those taxes are going to go to scientists at big universities whose job is to sequester carbon, to take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into the ground. You know a natural way to do that? You plant a tree. Because that's what trees do. They take in CO2, they use that carbon to make sugars, to build plant fiber, and then they release O2 in the atmosphere. So if you want to reduce atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, it's a simple process. Stop cutting down the rainforest, stop deforesting the planet, and let's start replanting trees. So land use changes, spread of agriculture throughout the world, this is the catalyst. So this is an important graph that Redmond comes up with. He basically shows here's the Earth at 15,000 years ago, and here we are today. And so this shows the natural trend of methane gas, which is probably one of the most powerful greenhouse gases of all. This is a gas that has actually increased because of agriculture, such as the cultivation of rice. Also, when you cut down the rainforest, you leave a lot of dead organic material lying around. That dead organic material tends to decompose. That decomposition then results in the release of methane gas, which is also a greenhouse gas. So this is where CO2 and CH4 should have been heading. And they depart from the norm between 5,000, 6,000, 8,000 years ago, and they start to increase. This increase is not attributed to the Industrial Revolution. It's not attributed to the use of fossil fuels. It's agriculture, plain and simple. And this is the main focus of his hypothesis. So there's definitely a trend in which carbon dioxide and methane levels start to increase 8,000 years ago. By the way, folks, this is 7,800 years prior to the Industrial Revolution, prior to the use of fossil fuels, prior to soccer moms driving around in SUVs using fossil fuels and polluting the atmosphere with CO2. So these trends should be decreasing, and yet they increase. And then what's out of the norm is that usually when the northern hemisphere cools, the southern hemisphere warms, and vice versa. They're generally opposite of one another. So if the southern hemisphere were to warm, the northern hemisphere would start to cool down. But now we're living in an age where both the northern and the southern hemispheres, the North Pole ice sheets, the Antarctic ice sheets, are both melting and warming together. And that basically has departed from the norm. This is probably the anthropogenic, the human element of climate change. So this is Mesopotamia. This is the Promised Land, the Fertile Crescent. Now a desert. Today it's Iraq and Iran. And we have basically transformed this region into a desert because of agriculture, because of deforestation, land use changes. And when you create a desert, you do two things. Like I said, you decrease the atmospheric concentration of moisture. And so drier conditions usually result in warmer conditions. And that's kind of the way it works. So cooler means wetter. So 12,000 years ago, before climate and global warming really started, the climate in Southern California was much cooler and wetter than it is today. So this is an interesting map. I love this diagram here. This shows ancient forests today compared to 8,000 years ago. And look at the changes that have occurred. So we, on a global scale, starting 8,000 years ago, have changed the entire makeup of rainforests. Even down in Costa Rica, which hails itself as the environmental nation of the world, its rainforests are not indigenous species. Most of the plants that you see growing in the rainforest today are introduced. Now people see a green earth and they say, well, that's cool, that's good, that's good. Green is good, green plants. What we're doing in a lot of these rainforests is we're cutting down trees, we're creating pasture lands for cattle, so you can have cheap beef. So you go to the fast food chains, and they're all guilty of this. They like to pick on McDonald's, but they're all equally guilty. They buy their beef on the spot market, and a lot of that beef prices is determined by grazing lands and once forested areas, areas that were once rainforest. And that's what we're doing. We're converting this land, we're planting palm trees, massive groves of palms, so it can extract the pods and extract palm oil, a huge ingredient in foods. What's palm oil going to do to us? It's going to give us congestive heart failure. It's going to make us fat. That is not already a problem in the United States because of corn syrup. So the agricultural giants are the evil here, and they're the ones who are driving this. In our own backyard, in the Pacific Northwest, places like Oregon, Washington, the United States government, which manages forest lands, allows strip mining to occur. And often they'll lease this land out to foreign nations like Japan. And when these companies come in, they strip mine everything. They don't own the land, they don't care, they just want the trees, they want the wood, and they want to take it back to their country and sell it. And that's what this whole thing comes down to, comes down to money. So if the United States government today wants to stop deforestation, it has the power to do so. But this gets into a political question here. Like, well, wait a minute. If we stop the cutting down of the trees, we're going to put on the unemployment list the loggers, the mills that create the lumber, the paper products. So we put a lot of people out of work, and this is where the political hot potato comes into the whole scheme of things. Politics get involved here, and so what's good globally is often sacrificed for what's good in a local economy. And we see the same thing going on in South America, where people are making their living by cutting down the rainforest. And so a lot of the deforestation that's occurring today is on government-controlled lands. So the hypothesis that humans disrupt the carbon cycle, land use changes, clear cutting, the spread of agriculture throughout Europe, Asia, and Central America. So the anthropogenic methane is really important. As larger areas of Asia are converted into the cultivation of rice, these rice fields emit copious amounts of methane gas. Methane gas is a far more important gas with regards to a greenhouse gas. It has a higher capacity to retain heat. So as that long wave radiation exits and tries to go out in space, methane gas traps that. The gas that is probably the most efficient at trapping long wave radiation exiting the Earth is water vapor. So water vapor is the most important greenhouse gas of all. Methane is probably the most powerful, second to water, and then carbon dioxide. But carbon dioxide, there's a larger atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide attributed to the industrial process, volcanoes. So there's natural CO2, and there's the human introduced aspects. So this is the Redmond Hypothesis. This down here is the tortoise. So the tortoise represents slow, steady state climate change through deforestation. The hare represents rapid increases in climate change, rapid increases in temperature, and this is attributed to the introduction and the use of fossil fuels. So the consumption of these fossil fuels results in higher atmospheric concentrations of both methane gas, CH4, and carbon dioxide. So the hare is also involving global mechanized deforestation today. So back in these days, 8,000 years ago, you had a couple of guys out there with a saw, and it took them months to clear an acre of land. Today we do an acre of land in a matter of hours. And this is the problem that we face, is that we have massive deforestation and we have the use of fossil fuels. We're cutting down the trees that can sequester and take in the carbon dioxide. And so we're almost creating a genocide. We're actually killing ourselves because we're destroying biomes throughout the world. And then with all these forest fires that we have, the reason that we have such dangerous forest fires is that we have introduced non-native species that burn. Good example here in California, in the Huntington Beach area. Springtime, you see this nice, pretty green that grows in the hills, gets about this tall, mustard weed, nice yellow flower. And then as soon as the weather warms in May and June, that turns into a dead brush, which is just a kindle box waiting for any match, a cigarette, a spark, a lightning strike to set it on fire. And this is the reason that we have seen an increase in the incidence of wildfires, is that there are so many introduced species. There are biomes that never burned before, such as the deserts. So the deserts out there in Lancaster that burned should have never burned. But they are burning because we, humans, introduced non-indigenous species of grasses that flourish in the spring and then turn into dry kindle in the summer. And this is why biomes like this burn. The chaparral, the hills around Southern California, is a natural biological community that burns. That's how it regenerates itself. So it builds up a lot of brush. That brush is then removed through fire. Go back to that same biome 2 years later after there's a fire, it's nice, lush, and green again. The problem with that is that we build homes in it. So when you build your homes in a biological community that regenerates itself through fire, and you build your house there, you're going to regenerate your house because you have to rebuild it. And so this whole aspect of wildfires and climate change, don't pay attention to the news. They're not scientists. They haven't read scientific journals. And if they did read the scientific journals, I doubt most of those people could understand those journals. And this is the problem we have, is that we have a dissemination of misinformation. And if you want to attack a problem, use the scientific method that we talked about in the early weeks of the class. So this is a new paradigm, and remember, when anybody in science introduces a new concept, a new way of thinking, they are automatically confronted with objections. Remember when Redmond talked about continental drift? He was basically put down by the scientific community. When scientists said, no, Aristotle, you're wrong. Two objects that weigh differently fall at the same rate. Whenever a new scientist has come up with a new paradigm, they've always met with severe objection. And that's unfortunate, because that stops the progression of science. It stops the progression of the scientific method, and it basically inhibits us from resolving problems. So the tortoise and the hare. The tortoise starts 12,000 years ago, slow, steady state climate change through humans changing of the landscape, deforestation, the spread of agriculture throughout the world. And today we're clearing land to accommodate livestock. We want cheap prices on beef. Bison were hunted to extinction in the United States, and those grasslands have been replaced with cornfields and wheat fields, and a lot of those soils, which were covered up year-round when they were grasslands, are now exposed for a large part of the year. Desertification resulting in higher ambient air quality, temperature increases, and basically lower humidity, where this is occurring throughout the world. And so the Redmond's hare basically is the industrialization of the past 250 years. We've had three major industrial revolutions. The first one was in Europe, then in the United States, and now in China. The next one will probably be in Pakistan or those areas. And all of these industrial revolutions were basically fueled by fossil fuels such as coal. Coal, easy to mine, high energy output, and so this is resulting in the dumping of carbon dioxide, methane into the atmosphere. And at the same time, we're cutting down the trees that can take in the CO2. So it's kind of a dual sword here. We're cutting with both ends. We're cutting down the rainforest and we're dumping carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. And so this intensive agriculture in marginal areas creating desert conditions. We're seeing this throughout the world. About the last quiz on weathering, and a lot of people, when I went ahead and graded the quiz on Canvas, I noticed that a lot of people confused weathering and erosion. So remember, weathering is the breakdown of rock, and erosion is the removal of that material. And we're seeing this erosion process throughout the world right now. So erosion is the physical removal, the transportation of material by wind, sand, by wind and water. And we see this occurring throughout the world. We see soil eroding at an alarming rate, and it's all basically humans, and it's mostly to be blamed on agriculture. So as global population intends to increase, there's going to be an increase in demand for agricultural lands. And so we're going to now extend ourselves out into areas that are kind of marginal, where maybe we shouldn't farm there at all. And that results in a huge destabilization of those natural ecological systems. This occurred out in a place called Newberry Springs. They removed the native plants. They overgrazed. They did intensive agriculture on marginal lands. That's lands that maybe should not have ever been subject to agriculture. As a result, the water table lowered. So when you start lowering water tables, plants like mesquites and cottonwoods that have their roots into the water, they can't keep up. So as we water that lower table lower and lower and lower, those plants can't keep up with that. And basically it resulted in farm abandonment and the destabilization of the soils out there. So there's a whole community out there near Barstow, Newberry Springs, between Interstate 15 and Interstate 40, where the houses were literally and are literally being buried by sand. This is because we have destabilized this region through agriculture. And this is a phenomenon we can see in Newberry Springs, but it's a phenomenon we see throughout the world. So agricultural impacts are just having a huge significance on climate change throughout this earth. This is a neat picture here. So this is a field trip that I led out to Newberry Springs. And if you look closely, this part of this house was tagged. So a tagger came along and tagged it when they abandoned it. Most of that tag has now been covered up by the sand. I went back to this house. The only thing that remains is the chimney, the fireplace that sticks up. The roof is completely buried. So this picture here was taken about 5 years ago. And so yeah, this house today also, the sand is now up to here, and this part was probably sticking out, and that was it. It might not even be there today, because there have been some significant winds out there. So this is an area that we destabilized through intensive agriculture. And that then resulted in a destruction of the soil. Wind came along and picked up this now destabilized soil and transported it, which is erosion, and then redeposited it on top of these people's homes. So there's a whole community out here where the homes have been abandoned and buried because of the soil erosion that occurred. And the soil erosion is directly attributed to agriculture. This is the inside one of the rooms. This is one of the houses that accumulated so much sand that it collapsed. And look at this area. This is a desert. This used to be lush fields. There used to be farm fields out here. They used to grow alfalfa. They no longer grow alfalfa there. It's too much sand. So I like this. We go on living, yeah, but somewhere else. And so to close this chapter, climate has been in a continuous state of change. We have a really good now accurate 750,000 year record of climate, and it's been cyclic. There's periodicity to climate change. So we see the times when Earth warms up and Earth cools down again. And then Earth warms up very rapidly and it cools down slowly. Now we can see this cycle on intervals of every 100,000 years, where we go from an ice age to an interglacial, back to an ice age again. So over the past 12,000 years, we have been moving back into an interglacial period where climate has been warming. But the question that remains, are humans pushing this cycle at a faster rate? Are we contributing to the cycle? And I think we are, due to intensive agriculture and land use changes. So we know about past climates because of oxygen isotopes in ice cores and seafloor sediments and in fossils. So these delta 1816 ratios tell us that past climates were warmer or cooler. And we found out that climate in the past has been much warmer than today. It's also been much cooler than today. And so are we in a natural cycle, or are humans really trying and really pushing this cycle? So we know there's two types of climates, greenhouse and icehouse. Currently we're in an icehouse climate where there's glaciers on Earth, but that may change and we move back to a greenhouse climate where there's no ice on Earth. And so this closes this chapter on climate change. I hope this alternative hypothesis gives you some insight, and open your mind and look at the scientific data. So always look at the data. Scientific data that's not been tainted by political oversights or political contributions to science. That occurs a lot, unfortunately. And so unfortunately there's a lot of science and scientists, especially at major universities, that have been corrupted due to funding. And so everybody wants funding to do research, but often that funding comes with a price. So we'll conclude here, and I hope you got something good out of this.